Hi, this is Sean Hafer, and in this video, we'll be going over some more After Effects basics. And today we're talking about mats. So we've already talked about masks in a previous video. So in this one, we're going to talk about mats and both alpha mats and Luma mats and what they are and how we can use them. I'm going to start off here, and I've got After Effects open. I'm going to import some files. So I'll provide links to the videos from Pexels, so you can download those below. And I'll also provide a link to the images that I created that you can bring in as well if you want to follow along. So I'm going to go up here. Let's create a new comp. We're going to go 1280 by 720, 24. That's fine. And let's do 10 seconds on this one. We can always lengthen it or shorten it if we need to. And then I've just got a bluish color as a background color. And let's name this one Alpha 01. All right, so we've created our comp here. Now let's import some of those files. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to import the whole folder. There's some frames that I exported from a 3D app that we'll want to bring in separately. So let's go ahead and just either double click here or Command or Control I, and let's go up to that AE Mats folder. So inside of here, I've got two folders of frames from 3D. We'll get to those in a few moments. I've got Alpha Mat, which is a PNG file from Photoshop. I've got Ink Drop, which is a video, black and white grayscale video of some ink dropping into some water. We've got another image, a JPEG of a Luma Mat, and we've got two videos. Here's some fish, and then from the previous vid, we've got that Pexels video again of jellyfish. So let's just shift select all of these and bring those in, import, and that looks good. And we've got our alpha JPEG, and we'll start off by making sure we know what all these are. So again, we've got this one is fish, so I'm going to change the name of it. Again, hit enter on your keyboard, and then say vid underscore fish. This one below here, this next one is our jellyfish. Again, enter vid underscore jellyfish. I think these other ones are fine. If you wanted to organize these into videos, so I mean, again, here, this one is a video, so maybe we do want to enter. I'll just put a vid in front. Vid underscore, okay. What's nice here, even alphabetically, these now are popping up in front. We could create some folders and organize this. If this was a project, I probably would do that. But I think for what we're doing here, this seems fine. We've got this. Let's drop our vid jellyfish into our scene. And now in our comp, we've got our timeline. We've got our vid jellyfish. Again, if you want to shrink this down, feel free. So now we've got that. And if I hit my space bar, we can see that going. Mats versus masks. Now masks we created, and we remember that by just coming up here. If we had this selected, we could come up and create a shape, right? And now that will mask out that shape. Or we could go in here and invert it so it creates a hole in the shape. I'm going to delete this mask here. We can do the same thing basically with mats, but mats can be imported or created inside of After Effects. And we'll do a few different examples of each of those as we move through. So now I'm going to take my Alpha Mat PNG and drop it right on top of vid jellyfish. Now, if I double click this, we can see that this I created, it's just Photoshop text. It's white text on a transparent background. And by double clicking this, it opens it up into its own sort of layer viewer. And then I can look here. I've got similar things to our comp window. So if I check my toggle transparency grid, we can see that that is transparent behind, and it's a PNG. This could be a PSD, it could be a TIFF, any format. Targas that can hold a transparency could be brought in this way as well. I'm just going to close this window. And what we can do now is we can come in here and say toggle switches and modes. So this down here is actually a button. So if you click this, you can see it toggles what we see up here. So in this case, we've got our shy guy. We've got our quality sliders. We've got whether effects are on and off. This is motion blur, 3D layers, etc. But as we go through here, visibility, which is a big one. But as we go through here, if we click it once, we've got modes, and that's our blending modes, just like Photoshop, right? So you can see multiply, additive, color burn, color dodge, all that. We also, though, have this thing called track mats. Now, you can also get to those by coming over here, and this will expand or collapse your kind of layer switches. So you can see that's with all of the little guys here with our that I showed before. That's our usual, what we see. Then here you can add in your tracks and modes, and now here you could also add in the in and out points and duration and time stretch information. So depending how you want to go, I usually just leave it with a short one just so I have more space here, and that gives me the ability to switch real quick. So I want to toggle it so I can see modes and track mats. And what I'm going to do is I want to use this alpha mat as my transparency channel or as my mat. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to first click on this first option, right? So alpha mat, use the alpha mat of alpha mat PNG. So you can see what happens. Our text, basically it's using the alpha mat, the transparency of our text, to turn our video transparent in those same areas. So if we drag our fish video down below at the very bottom, and then we play that, we can see we've got our fish video, we've got our jellyfish behind being masked or matted by that still image. Now, if we come in here, we can invert it, just like our masks, right? So if we do that, we can get alpha mat with just the fish in it, and then we get our jellyfish in the main area outside. So we just flip that. So that's the basics of using an alpha mat. Now, there's two other options if we pull down here. We've got Luma Mat and Luma Mat Inverted. Now, what that does, it looks at your image and uses the grayscale values of an image to create transparency. So an alpha mat or an alpha channel, right, in Photoshop is basically that same thing, a 0 to 255 grayscale image that allows transparency or not, correct? But if we're doing this with another image that is not officially an alpha mat, we can use it and read it as a Luma mat, which is looking at the Luma values. So let's do a new comp and look at that. So I'm going to do composition, new comp, or again, Command or Control N. Let's call this one Luma Mat. And this is fine. Hit OK. We've got another one. So let's go ahead and bring our fish back in, our jellyfish back in. And this time, let's bring in this lumamat.jpg. So I'm going to double click it here first. Now this has no transparency. It's just a JPEG. So it's got a black background, white text on this half, and 50% gray over here on this half. So let's drag that below, drop it on there, and now we can go ahead, go to our composition. Let's get rid of this vid, the footage video. Okay, there we go. And I can look at this and see we've got the same thing here. The thing about mats is they need to be right above the layer you're going to use them with. So if I come over here and go to track mat, I can't see my Luma Mat JPEG, right? All I can see is what's directly above, which is vid jellyfish. Now, if I came and brought this down below, right in the middle, then if I pulled this down, then I see Luma Mat JPEG. All right, so that's one of the disadvantages to using a mat, is you need to have that right there above. Now, you can duplicate your mat multiple times and use it over and over, but I'll show you at the end of this tutorial sort of an older way we used to work, but an effect that still is in After Effects that can kind of help solve some of those problems. All right, so now that we've got this, let's do the same thing. So if we go up here to track mat on vid jellyfish, and again, if you don't see these track mat column, toggle your switches modes here, and there it is. And on jellyfish, let's first start with alpha mat. Now we know this does not have an alpha channel, so basically it is just treating it as if there isn't one, and it is just saying, well, there's no transparency in here. Now, if I invert that, it's going to say it's all transparency, right? Because it doesn't have an alpha channel. It's just a still image, no transparency built in. But if we go down to Luma, now that's what we would expect, right? So when we think about that, our black background has become transparent. Our white type is showing our video, right? So it's matting out our video. And then our 50% gray has become kind of a mix. So it's about half transparent. So we see the fish, we see the jellyfish, and that's all going through. And that's only at 5 seconds. I think in my preferences, my imports set at 5 seconds. So that's kind of where we're at there, but that's all right. So that's where you can use a Luma Mat, and that could be grayscale of any kind. So if I come down here again and just switch that to inverted, it's probably what you expected to happen, right? We get just seen through the white text now, and again, 50% see-through of the 50% gray text. So Luma Mats are really powerful. You can use videos, you can use all kinds of different things here. And let's show this with a video next. So let's go ahead and create another comp. And let's call this ink drop. And so let's come in here and let's go ahead and bring our old friend, the fish in, bring our old friends, the jellyfish. And this time, let's bring in on the top our vid ink drop. So we've got ink drop, then jellyfish, then fish. Now, if we play this, we can see the ink drop is basically just this black ink coming into a white background. So now if we want to mat that, now this won't have transparency built in, but it does have those luminance values, right? So if I go ahead and hit this, now we can see as it comes in, that ink drop reveals what's below. Now, probably a more dramatic version would be to invert that. So let's go ahead and do Luma inverted, or we could swap our videos, right? But here, we can hit this, and that looks a lot cooler. So again, you might have seen this with ink spreading on paper, a lot of title sequences or blood running down the screen. Any of the James Bond title sequences use this type of effect over and over, right? So the other thing I forgot to mention as we're going through this is as you do this, when you go ahead, when we brought this in, right? So again, this is how we brought these in every time. But the minute you pick one of these as the mat, hold on, let me do this, sorry. So let me turn this back to no track mat. And the minute though you pick one of these, it will automatically turn the visibility off of the track that you're using as a mat. So if you still see that for some reason, or you accidentally turn it on and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Just turn off that visibility, that little eyeball there, and that's what's going on. So sometimes when you're adjusting, you might turn it on, forget to turn it off, and then you'll wonder why it didn't work. That's why. But by default, it automatically turns that eyeball off. So if you're looking at things, you're like, why is this invisible now? It's because After Effects turned it off for you. That's all. So that's what's happening there. So you can see where that could be pretty useful to use. Again, using a video and the luminance values to serve as a mask or a mat. All right. Now in the next example, I've exported some files from Cinema 4D with an alpha channel, and I exported them as stills. So I'm going to show you in this example how to import image sequences as well as how these come in, and you can use them as Luma Mat. So let's do one more composition, and we'll call this 3D Mat. And let's look at what we've got here. So one thing is, I know I rendered these at 30 frames a second. So by default, I just created a composition at 24 frames a second. Now, do I have to delete this and create a new one? Nope, not at all. Just come up here to composition, composition settings. And if you remember, Command or Control K, and we can come in here, and right here, frame rate. Let's make that 30. 10 seconds is fine. Hit OK. Great. Still here, 3D Mat. Now it says 30 frames a second. We're ready to go. So in this case, what I want to do is let's import, File Import, or Command I, Control I, or double click. So if I come in here, Import, File, and we've got these two folders. So what I'm going to do is open this first folder, DAP Solid, and you can see there's a lot of images in here. So basically, we've got 0 to 90 of A underscore DAP underscore solid. And then we've got 0 to 90 again of just DAP underscore solid. So what this is inside Cinema 4D, I told it, render a separate alpha channel for me, and then save each frame as individual frames. So that's useful in case something happens during the render. You can automatically just start where the frame messed up. It's also nice because you can render without compression, et cetera, et cetera. So I did TIFFs in this example. You could do Targas, you could do other things. Now with a TIFF, I could have put the alpha channel, built it in, or with PSDs, right? But I just did this so we can see how this happens. If you ever get a file like this, you can see how this would work. So first off, let's just grab the alpha channel. So A underscore, just hit the first one, 0000. So make sure you go by my name, get that first one. Now you can see what happens is it says import as footage. Yep, that's what we want. And then make sure TIFF sequence is checked. And then we can say import. And now what happens, you've got this little icon that looks like a stacked bunch of images, right? And that's an image sequence. So if we double click this into its own window and hit spacebar, you can see it plays it back, and it's playing it back at 30 frames a second. Now, hopefully in this case, you would know what they rendered your sequence at. And then that's where I know it was 30. So I updated my composition settings to 30. Now, if you go into your preferences, edit preferences, and we go into import. So this is not only where in the past we looked at to see how long still footage comes in. So I've got my set at 5 seconds. But the next one down is sequence footage. So you could set this by default, mine's at 30 frames per second. And it also will tell me if it's missing a number in the sequence, which is really nice. So for some reason I forgot one, or I started rendering and missed a frame or two, it'll say, hey, you're missing a couple frames, and you could run back and render those frames out. But if we knew this was 24 frames per second, we could come in here and set this in advance, or you were dealing with a lot of imported 24 frames per second, you could set your preferences. So it's up to you. I believe it defaults to 30, so I just leave it there unless I'm doing a lot of 24 frame per second projects. So right here, that's okay. I'll just bring it back, and that's what's going. So this is just the alpha channel. So it's basically black and white image. Now, even though it's an alpha channel, it's using the alpha channel inside of the 3D app of what was transparent. We're going to have to treat it like a Luma Mat. So let's do this. There's no transparency in that image. Let's go ahead and bring in the other part real quick. Double click, import, and then roll down to the first DAP solid, not A underscore, but just DAP solid. There it is. DAP solid 0000. It's the first green one. And then same thing, TIFF sequence. Perfect, import. All right. And then we can double click that one. And now we can see we've got that little DAP spinning around. Okay. So what we can do is, now that these are image sequences, and again, if you want to check that to make sure they are at the right frame rate, you can just go ahead and right click, come into interpret footage, go to main, and it's Command Option G or Control Alt G to get to that. And then it'll say frame rate. So if it was a video clip, it would use the frame rate from the file, but since these are images, it's saying assume this frame rate. And again, it's assuming 30 because that's what our preferences are set for. Okay, that's okay. Now, another cool thing in here is if you do have a video or you're bringing in an image sequence, you can set loops in here as well. So if we wanted this to loop a few times, we could set that here. So there we go. So let's go ahead and drag these into our old comp. So we've got that. Then the alpha channel to go above. And let's bring in just maybe jellyfish below, just so we have some background. Now you can see you can't stretch these anymore. These are basically, that's all the frames we have. It's 3 seconds of video. That's it. Now again, we could go back in, loop them, and that would allow us to go longer. But in this case, this is what we have. So over here, make sure you've got your toggle switches mode so you can see track mat. And we'll just do Luma Mat, ADAP, boom. And now you can see, I hit spacebar, we get the transparency from the Luma Mat, and then we can put this in there. Now you could use that same Luma Mat on anything, like another video, right? So if you just wanted to give the illusion, so like if we came up here and let's just say none here. And if I drop this one, let's turn that off so we can't see it. And I take this jellyfish and use Luma Mat ADAP, you know, you could get an interesting effect by giving the idea that it's 3D space, right? It's a 3D object. But it's, you know, a 2D plane, basically that video, but using, you know, that definitely feels like 3D. In our brain, we feel that's 3D. So it's a pretty cool technique to use sometimes, you know, using a Luma Mat from another render, or even rendering something out that you don't intend to use those shapes, but you want to just create a really interesting, compelling mat over your videos. So that's something you can do that way. All right, and so there is another folder full of those with semi-transparency, and so if you want to try those, you can do that on your own. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go to our next example. And so far we've just imported in mats, images to use as mats, right? Or sequences or videos. But we can use the transparency or the luminance values of different things that we create here in After Effects as well. So let's do a new comp. And we'll call this one AE Mat. That seems fine. Let's bring it back to 24 frames per second. 10 seconds is fine. And there we go. All right. So if we brought in our jellyfish again, and let's bring in our fish below it. So let's say we just wanted to create some text. So I'm going to call this one Mat. And again, my text is down below, so let's go up there. There we go. So Mat, and I'm just in Universe Black Extended. Let me crank that up a little more. And I'll go to my move tool and just sort of set this in here. All right, so if we had Mat here, and so if I double click this, so with this mat, this text, we know it's transparent behind here. So if we use this as an alpha mat, if I come up here, it's going to say alpha mat of mat. So all that transparency around that type will work just like an alpha mat, right? So even though we don't see it as black and white here, we're using the transparency value. So here we get the same thing going through. If we invert it, we get the same thing there as well. Now, if we use Luma, you can see it's not quite perfectly clear. That's because if we look at our value here, we're close in brightness, right? Our Luma value, but we're not all the way up. It'll look at the equivalent value of that, not the actual color value, right? So it's not looking at that. It's looking at basically the value or the brightness. So if we come in here, we can see now we've got matte. Now, if we wanted to use a luminance values, we could do something with some text. So let's go again. Let's do gradient. Oops. All right, I'll come up here, select tool. And let's shrink this down a little. All right, so now we've got this gradient here. So inside of After Effects, just like we had used the drop shadow in a previous tutorial, there are layer styles, right? So we can come in here and we could say layer styles, gradient overlay. Now you can see that immediately puts in a gradient. If we roll down that gradient, we see layer styles, we've got gradient overlay, and we've got a lot of options. So we can come in here and we can change the opacity. We can come in and adjust smoothness. We want it the angle, right? So if we wanted this to go across that way, make that 0. Now we're moving across. We could change it to a radial, or you can have an angle, or you can have reflected. So there's all kinds of different ones. We'll keep it linear. You can reverse it. And all of those kind of Photoshop-esque vibes. There's scale, all of that stuff. So when we're looking at this, now we could still use the Luma value, right? So if I came in here and let's duplicate this vid jellyfish. So to duplicate, you Command or Control D. It's not Control C, Control V. It's Command or Control D to duplicate. And now the thing is, it's still looking for this, what I had here. So what I'm going to go is make sure that vid jellyfish, it's already sort of selected because we already were using a track mat. But what I want to do is use Luma Mat gradient on this vid jellyfish. So I'm going to go ahead and now come in and make sure this one now is no longer alpha inverted. Let's just make that alpha matte, right? So it's showing through that full 50%. And then this one up here with vid jellyfish, we've got that set for Luma Mat gradient. You can see now it's fading out across the gradient. So it's using the Luma. Now, if we wanted to use the alpha, if we came in here and changed that, it's not going to take that into effect because that is on a transparent background. So in this case, we could use it either way. We could use it as the Luma, that is using our gradient that we created, or we can use it as the other. Now, one of the advantages of using something like this is we can now animate these mats. So like this text, if we just went in and said, okay, I want to hit T for opacity. We came down here. Maybe we started a few frames in, set opacity to 0, and set a keyframe. Now it's not visible. But if we move forward a few seconds, bring that up to 100, it'll automatically set a keyframe for us. Select both of those, hit our old friend F9 for an easy ease, and then we'll get a nice fade up, right? So that's another way you can sort of start combining all of these techniques using your scale, your transparency, your position, all of these things combined with masks and mats can start to create some really interesting and compelling animations and visuals. Okay, so one last, and then we'll wrap this video up. So the last one is what I talked about before. I mentioned that matte effect. So create one more composition, new comp, matte effect. All right. So what we're going to do here is let's go ahead and create a new solid for a background. layer new solid, or Command or Control Y, and that's fine. And what we can do is let's throw in the video jellyfish and the vid fish. And let's say we wanted these to use the same mat, and we'll just reuse our alpha mat PNG. Put that on the very top. So I've got alpha mat PNG, vid fish, vid jellyfish, and our solid we created. Now, if I created the track mat here, we know we can't use this one here. And so let's say what I want to have happen, I'm going to say after 2 seconds of vid fish, I want it to turn into vid jellyfish. So I'm going to move that layer down here. And with vid fish selected, I could go all the way back and grab that end and drag it down. But if you remember the shortcut, you just have to use your right bracket. And that will bring the end of the out point of your selected layer to where your time indicator is. Okay, so now we would have that. And so what happens, we've got that happening, and then it switches to jellyfish. I could duplicate this. So I could say, okay, I want vid fish, and I could duplicate alpha mat PNG and then put it down here and use them both. But if we use the effect channel set mat, you can see here now in our effects area up here, and we can also find it by going down here because it's an effect. We can come in here and say, okay, now take mat from layer, and you can pick anything, which is really nice. So I want to use the layer alpha mat, and source is fine. Use for mat alpha channel, or you could use luminance. You could use any of these others, just the red channel, blue channel, green channel, hue, lightness, saturation. So that's kind of cool. Now, what happened here, why it's bigger, is since this video is larger, it's got this checkbox automatically here. If layer sizes differ, stretch mat to fit. So I don't want to do that. I'm just going to turn that off in this case. And we should be in a good spot. So we've got alpha channel here. Now the thing is, you're wondering, well, why don't we see anything? Well, it doesn't automatically turn off the layer like our track mats do. So you have to do that manually, but there we go. Now we can see vid jellyfish is using that. Now what I want here is with my vid fish, I can do the same thing. Come up here, effect, set mat, it's right here. But if you need to go in, go to channel, set mat, and we can do the same thing. Oh, I grabbed the wrong one. Undo, effect, channel, set mat. There we go. And again, come in here and we want to use vid fish, use alpha. It doesn't really matter stretch mat to fit because they're the same size, so that's fine. Now, if you do want to invert it though, if you want to do something like that, you could go that route as well. So now we could have both of these using the same image as a mat, or it could be a video, it could be whatever, without having to duplicate that over and over. And we'll get into that a little more later. That can cause some issues in some cases, and we'll talk about that as we get into more advanced tutorials. But I think for this one, we've covered hopefully the difference between alpha mats and Luma mats, bringing in different files from Photoshop, using them as either an alpha mat or a Luma mat and inverting them and the differences. The idea of using the transparency of built-in After Effects objects like text so that we can use those as mats, and also bringing in sequences and adjusting your frame rate, and also going into your composition settings and making sure that all of your settings are what you want as far as frame rate and size. So hopefully you found this useful, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.